Through the My Toyota store, you can enjoy hassle-free online buying for your Toyota genuine parts and all make parts. With an electronic parts catalog containing over 400,000 Toyota genuine parts, all accessible through a model serial search, so you can take the guesswork out of identifying the correct part for your equipment. Get started today at shop.toyotaforklift.com. That's shop.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Bobby McKinnon, and he is the co-founder and CEO at Deliverlitics. And Deliverlitics is focusing in on one of the big problems out there in terms of delivery and packages, which are lost and stolen packages. And we're going to be diving into that, hearing a little bit about the background story on Deliverlitics as well, and how they're really addressing and approaching this issue that's out there, and even increasingly more as we have more and more e-commerce packages and deliveries happening every day. So, Bobby, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you having me on. Great to be here. Big fan of what you're doing. Doing great.
Thank you. And it's good to get you on too as well and talk about this issue. I mean, I think it's certainly something that's prevalent through the supply chain. Has been a big focus in the news as well for quite a number of years now. But before we kind of dive into the problem and how you're helping to solve it, why don't you give us just kind of a little background on you, and you're the co-founder of Deliverlitics. So tell us kind of what led you to founding this company and really what Deliverlitics is.
Yeah, so I think it's probably easiest to start at the beginning. I spent about half a decade after undergrad as a Army logistics and supply chain officer out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Did one tour over to Iraq and Syria in the late 2010s. Really loved my military experience. Like I think it gave me a set of tools and passions for leading organizations that have really pushed me to where I am today. Mm-hmm. So after the military, I went and did an MBA at the University of Virginia, and then went to work for Nike on their post-purchase e-com team, and went to another Series A backed blockchain data analytics startup after that. And sort of the whole time since I've left the military, in like late 2020, I've sort of always had this desire to get back to leading an organization and being able to build one from scratch, similar to, what I did when I was deployed, and sort of standing up things that don't exist and then, doing them to solve a problem. Right. And so middle of last year, 2023, started debating what I wanted next in my life and career, and met a group of guys that ultimately became my co-founders for Deliverlitics that were sort of working on this idea, incubating it in the background. We're kicking around ways that they could launch the business, and, talk with them. And it's a group of D2C merchants that run some pretty successful brands. And they sort of said, none of us really have the time to run this. But we think we have all the right data, all the right ideas. We think we understand from the merchant's perspective what matters to them. And I was fortunate enough to like I said, meet them and pitch what I thought was the best way forward, and how you could take this thing from just an idea sitting in a box to a fully functioning business that solved a problem for people. And I've been doing that since September of last year. It's been the most fun I've had since I was a military officer. So I am just pumped up to work on solving this problem, every day.
Yeah, awesome, and I think that's such a great story too. And I would obviously thank you for your service, definitely. And I'm curious actually to hear a little bit about that because obviously like the idea of logistics really was created from the military, right? And that's kind of like where the
Mhm.
origins come from. So I'm curious, like how when you're standing up operations, I imagine like very rapidly in those situations. I mean, how does that like kind of differ from the logistics maybe that we're going to talk about today, like around package delivery and things like that?
I think there's a lot of transferability. When I got over to theaters 2 weeks before Christmas 2018, and shortly after, maybe 2-3 weeks afterwards,
Mm,
at the time, President Trump put out a tweet that said, "We won, we defeated ISIS, war's over, we're coming home." And as it's been widely reported on, like there wasn't really a plan for that. We didn't really know any of that until
yeah.
he made the tweet. So I got sent up to northern Iraq, sat on a planning committee for like 4 or 5 days,
Mm,
and we said, all right, they said we got 120 days. We got to get all this equipment, all these people out of
wow.
Syria. We have to turn the whole thing over to partner forces on the ground. And so we sort of divided up the map, and my unit had about a quarter of the overall, land territory in northeastern Syria that we were managing. And they said, all right, dude, you got 120 days, figure it out. All that equipment, all those people, they got to get out. So immediately went into planning like airstrips. How do we, warehouse the stuff? Where are we putting it next? Whereas, follow on equipment destinations for, all these large pieces, mine resistant vehicles, what you would call like a tank effectively, and
Mm,
artillery pieces, things that really you have to transport pretty carefully. You can't let fall into, the wrong hands. And so, it's obviously very high pressure, right? But it just forces you to be creative, right? And you sort of
mm,
figure out like, okay, it doesn't really matter. Like there is no flip to the back of the, textbook and find the answer. You just have to figure it out, and you just
mm,
have to churn through it until you figure it out. And there really is no pretty way to do it, right? But I think there's a lot of lessons in that for startups and entrepreneurs.
yeah.
Like I haven't met one single entrepreneur who says that their path was straight up and to the right, and they just sort of woke up and went
Yeah.
9 to 5 and cranked it out. So I think in the world that we're in today, in e-commerce, I think I see more logistics based startups popping up every day, every week, right? And I think that beyond the obvious things of moving equipment and personnel, setting up staging areas, things that eventually look like warehouses or receiving centers and forward processing centers for carriers. Like I think you have these sort of deeper lessons in just there isn't a right answer, just figure it out, just push forward, and that high level of determination and grit,
Mm.
is probably going to end up being your most impactful trait.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's it's pretty remarkable to do all that in that short amount of time, like that window that you had. And I think that's kind of it's a testament to like just logistics as a whole. I think, people that are in the operations world and things like that, I mean, just doers, right? Like you said, like there's no textbook answer. It's just like, we just got to get it done, right? It's just like, how are we going to figure it out? Let's put the plan together and let's execute. And I think that's really, really great story there. So very interesting kind of your background experience there. And now, so coming to Deliverlitics, right? So, one of the big problems out there are lost and stolen packages, right? And, especially since we're seeing the frequency of deliveries be even higher, there's more packages out there, I guess more opportunity for people to steal them, certainly, and more opportunity for them to get lost too, just as there's an increased amount of movement. So tell us a little bit, I guess, talk to us a little bit about this problem and kind of how this has come like top of mind for you. And I'm curious too, maybe like from some of your experience at Nike, because Nike is certainly like something that people are looking out for? And, I've heard some stories about Nike's trucks getting, broken into and things like that. But I mean, tell us a little bit about how like this problem is kind of top of mind for you and, why you're looking to solve it.
Yeah. So it's an interesting problem, right? Because it's this incredibly dynamic system where you have a ton of moving pieces, and then within that creates opportunity for things to go wrong, right? Like I would bucket it into sort of three different categories. Okay. So like first is you have just stuff that gets lost, right? Like things are moving around in the flow, driver drops stuff on the wrong porch, it just doesn't make it on the right truck for the day. That screws up the flow of it. It ends up in the corner somewhere, right? No one really knows what it is. Maybe the label falls off. Like there's all these sort of different things that can happen that are just truly like errors, right? Mm. And then beyond that, there is like, carrier drops off a parcel on the door. And at this point, we've all seen like a Ring doorbell cam or something where some guy walks by and takes. I even saw one not too far from where I am in Sacramento where a guy was dressed as a trash bag, and that he like walked up. I mean, it almost looked like an old like Bugs Bunny cartoon or something, right? Where he like walks up and like sets the thing down, and then you see like a hand go out and take the package, and then like the trash bag walks away. Mm. And then, so that's obviously like a real issue. And then because that's a real issue, you also have like a first party fraud issue, right? Mm. Which is where I get a package, I legitimately place the order. It's in my name. It's on my credit card. It's to my house. Mm. And I just decide I'm not paying for this thing. Like maybe it's a bad month, maybe I'm having a tough time. Mm. And I'm going to tell you that it got lost. I didn't receive it. Mm. And, you're going to ask me for some evidence. I'm going to tell you I don't have any sort of camera system. And then it's down to you as a merchant. Like, are you going to refund me? Mm. Are you going to send me a new item? And in many cases, especially larger retailers will make that decision to send somebody a new thing or to just hit the refund, right? Because it's not, they've done the analysis. It's like not worth looking into. And so this person effectively gets away with a free thing. And it may not seem like that big of a deal, right? Like who cares? It happens every once in a while, right? Mm. But the total sum of all of these things happening is somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $20 billion. Wow. is what it'll end up being this year across like all of e-commerce, right? And over the years, there have been a number of things that have popped up, like shipping insurance products, and add $4 to that you sort of automatically opt a customer into during the cart checkout process, right? To cover lost and stolen shipments, but you don't really see that number trending downwards, and I think that's because just like everything else in the economy, right? Like if you're applying this sort of financial control, right? You're adding some sort of expense to the process, then all you're really doing is subsidizing the problem. You haven't really effectively solved it, right? You've sort of said there isn't really a way for me to solve this. So what I'll do instead is I will push around the financial risk. And it's a good like step one, but it is nothing to actually solve the problem. And if anything, it only encourages people, to do it more, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's certainly, there's some great points in there because I think, certainly there's a lot of different opportunities now. And I think it's, the example you gave where, someone's reporting something as lost because, they want the money back and they want to keep the item and, essentially doing some type of fraud there. I mean, I think it's challenging because I know like I had an experience like that reminds me of an experience I had where a package said it was delivered and, it wasn't there, couldn't find it, didn't blow off the porch, wasn't in the bushes, wasn't in the mailbox, wasn't like on the side of the house, nothing. And I went back and forth with the brand, like, again, they would not like issue me a refund or send me a replacement. And, they're telling me to go talk to the post office and all this stuff. And I feel like it's a difficult line, right? Because, as a brand, it's like, well, if somebody's legitimately saying that something didn't show up or got lost, like, do you want to punish them because other people are, tricking the system, right? So it's like a slippery slope. So, I mean, in that that sense, talk to us about, because the consumer obviously has a big impact, right? Whether it's lost or stolen, or they're suffering from other people's mistrust or mishandling of the system. I mean, talk to us about the impact from like a service provider perspective. Like, what's the impact for like the brand? What's the impact for the carrier? And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of like what's the impact for maybe like the 3PL too, that might be doing that fulfillment.
We'll be back after a quick break.
When it comes to systems, you want something that will start showing results fast. You're looking for a tool that can enable your 3PL or warehouse to get to the next level. So why wait? That's why Carton Cloud provides supported, fast onboarding that can have your WMS up and running in hours, not months. Jump into Carton Cloud's easy-to-use workflows for all of your services, including cross-docking, serialized inventory tracking, e-commerce order fulfillment, and more. This software is built by logistics people for logistics people, and those logistics people are standing by to help train you and support you so that you can be successful with your customer. With 24/7 real-time reporting and free online training, you need to check out Carton Cloud for your operation. Take the next step in your operation by heading to cartoncloud.com/free-demo or click the link in the show notes.
Yeah. So I think you hit on a really important point in your story. Like, I mean, I guess I'll ask you this, like, did that experience, make you consider, never repurchasing from that brand again? Like, did you sort of have a bad taste in your mouth ordering from that brand?
Oh yeah. I was like, I'll never order from them again. Yeah.
Yeah. So exactly. Right. Like,
Yeah.
this is the problem, because a lot of questions that I'll get is like, okay, so like, this is an issue. Why don't people just not give them a refund? Like, if you can't provide the evidence. And it's like, well, dude, I mean, there are tens of thousands of people a week in the US where this is happening, and they're totally legitimate. And, one of the themes across e-commerce over the last, especially 4 years since the pandemic is customer acquisition costs are rising incredibly rapidly, right? And so they spend a lot of money to acquire Kevin as a good customer who is not a fraudster, right? Some shit just happened, because things do. And now they lost you, like, over, some obstinance. And, I understand the impulse, but, a lot of brands that I work with and speak with sort of have the opposite impulse, which is that they understand the CAC issue, right? And they understand that retention is cheaper than new acquisition. And so they'll just stomach it. And this is really why a lot of major retailers have this problem, right? Is they are more prone to just stomach it to try to retain you as a customer. And that's where that opportunity lies, right? Like, that's what sort of creates the opportunity for this problem to exist. And so, I think you were at Manifest back in Vegas in February. So when I was there, it was walking around and meeting with some of our customers and partners. And one of the carriers I spoke to, I won't mention them by name, but I got introduced by a partner to the COO of one of the regional carriers that was present at Manifest. And I started talking about this problem. And he had this big audible sigh. He was like, dude, I do not want to talk about this. I was like, dude, I know it sucks. Like, just, a couple minutes of your time, whatever. And he was like, listen, man, we're just playing whack-a-mole. Like, I don't know what the answer is. We've been trying to figure this out for like 7 years. I have no idea what the answer is. And so from a carrier perspective, like, it does seem like there's a level of fatigue that is set in there, right? Where they deal with this all the time, right? Because every brand and every retailer and every merchant tells them, or tells the customer when this happens, like, go talk to the carrier. The customer goes to talk to the carrier. Carrier is like, this is the umpteenth thousandth, one of these I've gotten this week. And they just, it's just, for them, they're like, my impression, again, it's not something anyone said to me, just my impression is like, this isn't really my problem as the carrier. I did what I was contracted to do. I dropped this thing off. Whatever happened afterwards isn't really on me, but somehow now it is. Right? Because the consumers had this bad experience and the brand wants me as the, the contracted carrier, the service provider to deal with it. The brand doesn't want to deal with it for obvious reasons, and then meanwhile you sit there and you have, Kevin sitting there with his package, not on the porch anymore. He's I just want either my shit back or I want a refund. And because I would like to either buy this product again, or I would like to buy a competitive product somewhere else because I still need the thing I wanted to order. And so it's creating a really bad consumer experience that is quite difficult to measure, mostly because there isn't a lot of attention being paid to it. But, I think in the coming, year, I think a lot more brands are going to get wise to, this impacting their retention as we, sort of expand and move through different brands who see positive impacts on CX from our product.
Yeah. I think it's such an interesting thing, and I love the story of his big sigh. He's like, I just don't want to talk about this because you hear about it all the time, I'm sure. And I mean, I think it is such a it's such an impact, and it's such a difficult thing to chase, because it is kind of like, who is really responsible at that point, right? And like, how do you figure that out? So, as we see this problem, and obviously it's prevalent across the industry, across just the world and consumer lives in general. Now, how do we look at this, and how is Deliverlitics coming in to help address this problem and try to resolve this?
Yeah, so I think this is this is a great application for AI, right? And I always kind of cringe internally when I say that, because I feel like there is so many little AI-isms out there, right? And it's like the new hot buzzword. It's like telling people that, it's like trying to explain to somebody about blockchain. They hear it and it's just I cringe internally. So I'm like, I know exactly what you're thinking. But, I think a better way to explain it, right, is there's all this data on these incidents that are out there, right? And there's all this other data too that exists. I would classify it more as geospatial intelligence related stuff, right? So the distances between points on a map, distances from certain locations, right? I mean, there's all sorts of different factors that change by state, right? Certain states have certain laws against this stuff, ranging from misdemeanors to felonies, and there's sorts of all these different things that can impact the propensity for this to occur in a given area, right? And so AI is a really useful tool in this, because it allows you to take in all of this data that, if I were to try to process or understand this myself, again using our executives turn of phrase, playing whack-a-mole, you'll never see the pattern, right? It's going to be so hard to figure it out. But AI allows us to sift through these things, find the points of correlation, find the things that are causing these events to occur or contributing to their propensity to happen, and then we can predict them. So we can say it happens a bunch in places that look like this, and then we can project those onto the rest of the country and different states, and we can say, okay, given these sets of circumstances and initial conditions, these are the likely outcomes, right? And then once you know what the likely outcomes are, and you can calculate some sort of a probability of these events occurring, then you have a roadmap to solve them and deal with them, right? In the same way that a financial trader knows is attempting to calculate the probability of a stock going in a certain direction, right? What is the market pricing in at the moment? That's sort of the turn of phrase there, right? So you can use the same sort of set of logic, and you can say, what is the likelihood for an event to occur in this place? What does that do to the, sort of as a gambler would say, the expected value of this delivery, and then what does that delta allow me to do, right? And so that's sort of how we think about the problem. And so when we work with a brand, take our Shopify plugin as an example, right? It's probably the easiest way to explain it.
Sure.
Whenever an order comes through your store, we'll transmit some data back to us about the order, and then we'll form the risk assessment, couple seconds, and then transmit what our risk assessment is back to you, along with some sort of recommendation based on the value of the package and the sort of what's inside the box and what you can do with it, right? So it could be something as simple as adding a signature verification requirement. It could be sending to a pickup location, if you're a big retailer and you have your own brick and mortar locations, maybe it's sending it to BOPIS, and sort of not doing a home delivery. There's all sorts of different options that, brands and retailers can take, but you really, unless you understand the risk, you're just sort of blindly shooting in the dark, right? Like you're underwriting based on gut feeling, essentially, not based on any real data or information, which, is obviously like not a very efficient way to do that. And if you are doing it that way, then you're likely leaving money on the table, right? Like one of our customers that we work with was placing signature verification on every order over a certain dollar value, right? And I was like, man, you're bleeding way too much margin on these large orders. And it's really hard to get these large orders. Like you work really hard to upsell. You work really hard to push certain product bundles. Like don't sacrifice, real percentage points of your margin on a signature verification that you didn't need, right? Like you probably only need to do a few of these every month. You don't need to do 300 of them every month or 50 of them every month, right? You probably need to do a handful, maybe a dozen to mitigate your real issue. But, without a way of, projecting that risk, there's not a good way of underwriting what your policy effectively ends up becoming.
Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting to look at it from that perspective. Like you're giving them the risk assessment and then a potential recommendation on how to go about that delivery or getting that product to the customer. I mean, I'm curious, like on the customer side, the consumer side, I mean, because if like the one example you said, like instead of maybe shipping it to a location, maybe it's a BOPIS instead. I mean, like how does that work for the customer, right? If the customer is going to like check out, now this risk assessment is happening, I guess, in the background. So how does that now get like presented to the customer that like this is a better option or like this is the option that you have?
Sort of depends on, what the brand's preference is in or so like BOPIS, right? This is going to be, a situation where you're talking about like a fairly sizable retailer, right? And so like there's a number of different ways that you can do it. I think like a good way that people see some success with is they sort of carrot and stick, the consumer. So they'll offer, some sort of coupon or discount on doing the BOPIS, right? They'll give them some sort of incentive to show up at the store to claim it as opposed to home delivery. Maybe they'll throw in like a bundled item, some sort of product that they're trying to offload. Maybe they'll simply just not offer free shipping. Okay. And then the free shipping option is the BOPIS option. You can use like Kohl's Cash, right? Like some sort of like reward system, right? Where like you're offering them maybe some, 2x on rewards or whatever, the loyalty points if you do the BOPIS. Like there's sort of an infinite pool of options that you have to exercise around how it is exactly that you steer people into that. But, I think like one thing I want to be super clear on is like literally part of our terms of service is that you cannot use our risk recommendations to deny service. So you can't just use this to like create a blacklist. Right. Yeah. And so we're trying to solve this issue. Understanding that it is both like a brand issue and a consumer issue, right? Like your consumer, with whatever I do in the background, it cannot negatively impact your overall consumer experience, right? Maybe it impacts your consumer experience negatively for a few tiny percentage of people who are very likely to commit fraud against you. But for everybody else, you need to be shopping friction free, right? Anything I do cannot like sort of slap brakes on the freight train, right? So I think, what we focus on when we onboard and work with brands and retailers is how do we make sure that your consumer experience is in the largest sense, the 99.5%, totally unaffected and unimpacted and sort of proceeds as normal. And so like, again, it looks different for everybody just because everyone's got different setups. Everyone has different distributions and layouts of their brick and mortar locations, or they have none at all. And so they're relying on leveraging maybe it's UPS or FedEx pickup point, and then that depends on where your customers are, right? Like, do they live near them? I mean, there's a lot of different like intricacies and nuances that we probably don't have a lot of time to get into today, and would probably be very boring for your audience. But those are things that we work through with brands, like in an onboarding process.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because it is like that thing. Like, how do you try to protect yourself more as a brand, but then also not like disrupt the service level to the customer, right? Like, how do you find that balance? And I think it's pretty interesting the example you gave too with the signature verification, where they're just like doing a blanket signature verification, where, like you said, like they probably didn't need to do that for everything. Like, it's just a small percentage probably needed it, which is like you said, it was certainly a margin hit for the brand, but then also like a little frustrating, annoying kind of sometimes for the consumer too, right? Like, if they have to sign for something and they're not there, or they're not aware or something like that. I mean, I think there's like a difficult balance to find there, like to protect yourself, but then also like protect your customer and keep your customer too as well. So it's very interesting how you guys are going about that and doing this kind of risk assessment for the companies and helping out on both sides of it. So now, if we look towards kind of the future of things, and we look at this overall issue, whether it's lost or stolen, or just issues around delivery with the packages, I mean, how do you see this kind of evolving over the next few years? I mean, is it going to get better? Is it going to stay the same? I mean, what do you think kind of that looks like?
Well, my goal is to make it better, right? So yeah. I think optimistically, I'm sort of somewhat obligated to tell you I think it's going to get better, but I do think that it is possible, right? Like, this is kind of a really dated example, but when my parents were kids and they would go to a grocery store, right, there would be up against the register like a bunch of old bad checks with certain people's names who had tried to write bad checks to pay for groceries before, right? Because you used to be able to do that, and like the cashiers would be looking for people who are writing bad checks, and once you started doing that and you started having some, tech lid on top of it, with sort of some of the instant fraud check and verification stuff that happens now with credit cards, like that's not really an issue anymore, right? Like that, it doesn't really happen. And so I think whenever you implement good, risk and fraud prevention and assessments, then you really change and impact human behavior, right? Because people, they don't see the scam as profitable anymore, right? It's too much work and too much labor to put into for a smaller and smaller amount of squeeze, or, juice after the, larger amount of squeeze. And so, I think what I foresee is that in the next, maybe it takes 3 or 4 or 5 years, but we start to meaningfully change and impact human behavior as we scale up and push across different merchants and retailers, and sort of people are chased into so the fraudsters are sort of chased into the corner where it's just no longer profitable, and they look to find sort of another opportunity.
Interesting. Yeah. And obviously I think you guys will help to make it better, definitely. And I think it's interesting to see some of the factors there too at play, and it'd be interesting to see how that continues to evolve and what that looks like over the next few years. But I think it's certainly something that needs to be addressed, and you guys are addressing it. So I think that's a great thing for sure. So very interesting to talk to you here, Bobby, and get some insights from you about Deliverlitics and just this problem overall in the market, and hear a little bit about your background. If people are interested in Deliverlitics and they want to find out more information, or they want to add it to their Shopify, I mean, what's the best way to go about doing that?
Yeah, so deliverlitics.com. You can find us there. There's a link to our Shopify app. We're live on the App Store. So if you just search Deliverlitics on the Shopify App Store, if you're a merchant out there, you can install it. We'll get you scheduled for an onboarding call. And then, I'll personally make sure that you're, set up and good to go.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewerhouse.com so people can easily find it. So, Bobby, thank you once again for joining me on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.